Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast brought to you by RenewableEnergyWorld.com. Today's event, Commercial Solar Project Development from Customer Acquisition to Operations and Maintenance, will be presented by Andrew Savage, Chief Strategy Officer with All Earth Renewables, and Nader Jandagi, Director of CNI Solar with EDF Renewable Energy. This webcast is sponsored by EDF Renewable Service and All Earth Renewables. And again, I'm Jennifer Runyon, Editor-in-Chief of RenewableEnergyWorld.com, and I'll be the moderator today. So a little housekeeping. The presentation is both live and interactive, so you can ask questions at any time by clicking on the Ask a Question button in the presentation window. And if you're running pop-up blocking software, you need to disable that to view the webcast. In addition, it's recommended that you close down all other applications just for better performance. And for your convenience, the presentation will be available on demand within 24 hours of this live event. A reminder email message will be sent to all registrants with a link to the archive, and it's also going to be accessible from RenewableEnergyWorld.com. With that said, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Andrew Savage. Andrew is the Chief Strategy Officer at All Earth Renewables, manufacturer of the All-Sun Tracker, where he oversees public affairs, communications, and strategic business development initiatives. He serves on the board of directors of the Solar Energy Industries Association as the vice chair of distributed generation. Andrew also serves on the Renewable Energy Vermont Legislative Committee as 2011 and 2014 chair, where he helped develop and pass Vermont's first-in-the-nation solar registration program, net metering expansions, and statewide solar adder. The registration program was named one of IREC's top 10 notable policy developments of 2011. And Vermont Solar's deployment has quadrupled in the 3 years since these policies were enacted. Mr. Savage received his bachelor's degree in political science and environmental studies from Middlebury College, graduating summa cum laude. And now I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks, everyone, for joining the webcast. So the intent of the presentation that I will focus on here is on small and mid-sized commercial solar. And this is really between the 20 kilowatt and 1 megawatt or so projects. This commercial industrial sector is a vast business segment between the very small residential and the very large utility. And so certainly there's some variation when you get to the lower end of the small commercial and the higher end of the large commercial. But we're going to focus on the small and mid-size today. And I think this is also a major growth area for many solar installers who have had success in the residential market but want to expand their business and potentially want to expand in project scale. And I think that there are really three major segments in this class. It's the businesses that one sells to, municipal and government projects, and then institutional, such as hospitals, colleges, and nonprofit customers. And I think what's worth focusing on first are the challenges. There are certainly some unique challenges in this sector. Project financeability is much harder here in this smaller scale. If you're utilizing third-party ownership, most investors won't even look at projects below 500 kilowatts. And so we immediately have a financeability problem in the small commercial sector. The second is ensuring bankability. Unless you're utilizing a utility PPA or a feed-in tariff or other must-take program, you need a willing off-taker customer for a net metering commercial solar project to work. And so we look to the government projects, colleges, hospitals, and businesses. And then third, there are higher development costs. This scale of solar lacks the efficiency of large commercial and utility scale solar. For example, the all non-residential cost for solar currently is at $2.27 per watt, compared to utility scale solar at $1.88 a watt. So you really do have higher development costs throughout the commercial sector, and certainly even higher in the lower scale commercial. And then you also have the challenge of customer decision-making process. This is a large soft cost in this segment of the industry. Is there a single decision maker, or will there be a governing body that will make a decision? Do they go to bid, or do they issue an RFP? These are all factors that drive costs. Another major factor is meeting the customer's actual solar interests. We've found that customers often start with a misguided assumption on potential solar savings or potential solar payback in the case of a purchase. And then finally, related to that, there's a big learning curve for solar, even beyond the technical side. If you put yourself in the perspective of a customer's shoes, electricity is generally a small portion of most customers' costs. They are used to paying their bills, and to come up the learning curve for solar can often be perceived as simply not worth it for those benefits. So then we think about acquiring these commercial customers effectively. And part of prospecting for potential customers strategically is leveraging local relationships and seeking referrals from existing customers or businesses. We've often found that even just looking in local business magazines and newspapers for what businesses are up to and whether they've made other environmental commitments can be a key driver for approaching a new business with solar. And I think the biggest factor is really striving to meet the customer's individual interests. Are they interested in return on investment, the marketing benefits of solar? Are they motivated by mission? Do they have sustainability commitments that they need to make? Or perhaps high tax liabilities that they want to absolve with investment in solar? So it's really worth distinguishing early on whether or not a customer is looking at an investment vehicle as in ownership or simply electric budget stability with a lease. And I just recall a meeting with the CEO of a customer of ours, Woodchuck Hard Cider, and in just the introduction of talking with him, it was so clear from the expansion plans that they were discussing and the business trajectory that the idea of it being an investment vehicle was completely off the table. And so, you focus on the lease option and clarify the pitch. And so you really want to put yourself in the customer's shoes as you're approaching their interests. And so that really should be your selling approach. And certainly bringing financing to the customer, as this industry has so acutely found out over the last several years, really makes the sale so much easier. The principals, the executives, the leaders of the organizations, whether private or public, really aren't in the business of solar finance. They're running companies, they're running hospitals, their schools or cities, and to make the solar sale easier, you bring financing to the table. There's no capital costs, no O&M risks, no tax issues that they need to go through. And of course, third-party ownership is critical for any non-tax-paying entity that can't utilize the investment tax credit. So I think two bottom line points for the acquisition side is finding an internal champion. If you can't find an internal champion very early on in the solar sale, my experience has been that it's very hard to complete the solar sale. And we've had excellent luck actually working with marketing departments, because instead of immediately sharpening the pencil and looking at the economics of solar, they can see the press releases and the ribbon cuttings and some of the benefits of solar beyond that, and then bring that to their team. And then bottom line is keeping it simple, recognizing what the customer wants and has the bandwidth for, and then deciding whether or not you have the option that can work for them, work for prospective financing, and actually work for your business. And over to the right, the image to the right is an example of one of the sell sheets that we use, where we actually list prominent references that individuals can call that they may even know in their own community, and then the quantity of customers that we've worked with to give them comfort that we've done this with others successfully. And one factor that I would think a bit about is getting the sales team thinking about and oriented around delivering a pipeline and repeatable business. Repeat business can drive down what are otherwise higher initial customer acquisition costs. Do they have multiple offices? Can you approach a school district, et cetera? And a few recent examples we've seen in the industry is NRG Energy has an entire sales channel for this repeatable customer class. For example, Unilever, which among their brands is Ben & Jerry's, is working with NRG on a solar initiative. And so they're willing to do these 500 kilowatt and smaller projects because they have a true pipeline. SunEdison just recently announced a deal with the Massachusetts Housing Authorities, again, lowering the total cost because they have repeat business. And an experience that we have had is securing the state of Vermont for projects across government agencies, where we're in the process of building over 4 megawatts of projects at the 500 kilowatt level. And there's a significant factor in being able to offer third-party ownership beyond just the revenue that a project can produce, beyond the rate that the solar produces. It is the off-taker creditworthiness. It's not usually an issue in what folks call in this industry the MUSH category, municipal, university, state, or hospital off-takers, but it really is in the business sector if you're looking to work with business off-takers. And we find financiers are often looking for several years of audited financial statements, revenue income sources, including major revenue changes that they expect, and pending legal matters and business outlook, as well as utility costs. So this is just an example of some of the things that you will want to ensure your potential business partner has good numbers on. And then on the legal side, given the cost and financeability challenges in this sector, document standardization is critical for both financeability and cost savings. PPA terms are critical to ensure you both have a rate that is high enough to finance, but also give a predictable cash flow to the investor. And we've found that investors are far more comfortable with a fixed rate PPA over index or floating rates that might float with utility rate increases. Also, customer buyout options are a great way to get a decision maker within a customer's organization to say yes, because essentially they can sign up at no cost early on and then have the option to buy it down the road. And then for project siting, most businesses or facilities simply aren't situated for solar. They're leasing their building, they are amidst dense development, they may not have a viable roof space. And so one thing we look at it as a key policy question is virtual or remote net metering permitted, allowing a project to be sited separately from the actual electric load, in which case we might pay a lease payment through the solar generator to that lease customer. And then finally, we found a good practice to be is utilizing individual project LLCs. So the project LLC can simply be transferred after project development is complete. And then finally, standardizing the permitting process using fixed cost permitting with the lawyers, et cetera, to drive down costs. And so when we get to the project development side, we're really, again, looking for efficient, repeatable standardization of project development. We do all of our work on the ground. That's where our product fits. But rooftops really do require unique challenges for each installation. They're often more complex for permitting, complex with legal requirements, et cetera. And then we're able to utilize templates for one-line electrical drawings, and we assist our partners with standardization of product procurement so they get the same product every single time and can become more efficient about their installation process. And then continuing in that vein, on the job site, we seek repeatable process on the ground. We encourage partners to use jigs to assemble frames on site. We choreograph more efficient processes by the install crew. We really are looking to follow the lean principles that we use in manufacturing out in the field. One example is the use of cable and conduit, where we utilize string inverters between each of the trackers, and therefore we only have to use AC wiring versus running DC wire as well, and simply burying the conduit versus pulling wire. So it's one of those things that we've looked at as we look at reducing the soft costs and then the install costs of solar is using cable and conduit for a more rapid install process. And here's just a quick example of a job site where you've got a standardized pre-engineered product that arrives on site on pallets and can be assembled one at a time as you go through in a very lean method. And I wanted to just quickly touch on three quick case studies before turning it over to Nader and answering questions that might highlight a few of the concepts that we've talked about in this presentation. First is on the very small side of commercial solar, a 39 kilowatt project with Concept 2, a small business that does rowing equipment manufacturing. Their desire for solar was oriented around their mission. They were also looking for a return on investment that led them to decide to own half of the project and then do a phase 2 where they leased the other half of the project. And really this project was successful because we had a true internal champion. The CEO was very motivated to make this solar investment and the solar decision. And so because of having a stronger internal champion, it was a sale that was much more efficient than what you might find otherwise when you had a large governing body or RFP, et cetera. And then going up in size, the Soil Land project, a 205 kilowatt project out in California, really came about to address the customer's problem. They had a utility rate increase as a result of a change in tariff structure. And so working with a local dealer-partner relationship and that dealer providing technical solutions to the customer's problem, they were able to find solar driving down their costs and actually producing a 7 to 8 year payback period for them. So while they were essentially motivated to come to solar because of a problem, the utility rate increase, and then solar was able to become a solution to them because of technical expertise provided to them by a local solar installer. And then finally, as an example of repeatable business, the State of Vermont project, which I alluded to earlier, where we're doing 500 kilowatt projects for state facilities. And I think a key selling point here was the guaranteed budget savings. As most folks would know, governments tend to be very risk adverse, and so what we ended up doing was designing an indexed PPA that would float no matter what, up or down with their electric rates. And while, as I noted earlier, that's a little bit harder to finance because financiers prefer fixed PPAs, this was the method that we were able to get the customer to sign on for significant repeatable business. So across nearly 20 state utility accounts, we've been able to produce projects for nearly 4 or 5 megawatts of solar. So with that, I will be happy to turn it over to Nader. I think that this small and mid-sized commercial field is ripe for expansion, even with the challenges that we mentioned, and look forward to taking questions after the webinar concludes.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andrew. It's so nice to see the standardization happening in project development. I mean, I remember it wasn't too long ago when it seemed like every project, at least people were telling me, was brand new and very different. So nice presentation there. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce Nader Jandagi. Nader Jandagi is the Director of Commercial and Industrial Solar for EDF Renewable Energy. He's responsible for the origination of ground-mount, rooftop, and carport solar projects for distributed generation markets across North America, including commercial, industrial, and utility off-takers. This includes greenfield developments as well as acquiring portfolios of DG assets from other developers. Prior to joining EDF Renewable Energy, Mr. Jandagi worked at Bloom Energy, where he helped Fortune 1000 companies adopt on-site electricity generation for their facilities using fuel cells. And prior to Bloom Energy, he worked for Suntech, where he spearheaded the adoption of solar electricity generation for the residential, commercial, and utility sectors in the U.S. and Middle East. Mr. Jandagi holds a PS in Structural Engineering from UC Berkeley and an MS in Construction Management and an MBA from the University of Southern California. Now I'll turn it over to Nader.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Renewable Energy World. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all the attendees for taking some time out of your Friday to join us today. My name is Nader Jandagi. I'm the Director of Commercial and Industrial Solar for EDF Renewable Energy. We're a renewable energy owner-operator IPP. And today I hope to share some thoughts with you on commercial solar project development, kind of cradle to grave, all the way from customer acquisition through construction to operation and maintenance and asset management. I'll start off mainly going through case studies and really talking about all those items through case studies, and then segue into O&M, asset management, OEM versus third-party O&M, and then wrap it up a couple slides on the background of EDF. Very complimentary to Andrew. Andrew looked at the small to medium-sized commercial market, whereas I'm going to be focusing more on the medium to large scale solar projects for commercial. And Andrew alluded to this in his presentation, net metering. It really has been for quite a while the main transaction mechanism for commercial customers, industrial customers to get solar, and has really helped us certainly to identify those markets where we need to go after customers, identify them and acquire them. The various flavors of net metering is really where the sizes have gone up and have opened up markets for developers like us and for customers. I'm sure everybody on the call is very familiar with the traditional form of net metering, on-site net metering there on the left, where both the kilowatt hours are produced and consumed at a single site, a single location. And you can even have, the term everybody uses, spinning your meter backwards. Over the past 5 years, we've seen different flavors of that. Remote net metering is where the kilowatt hours are actually generated at a separate site than where the load is. Typically with remote net metering, the utilities require that both that host site and the satellite sites are owned by the same entity. The meters are owned by the same entity. So imagine a large company that's got an office building in one location and a lot of load at that location, but not a lot of space. And they might have a warehouse somewhere else with a lot of rooftop space, but not a lot of load at the warehouse. They can, in effect, install the solar arrays at the warehouse, but then credit the kilowatt hours to their office building. So a great mechanism for people who don't have space. And then finally, virtual net metering, which in fact entirely decouples the generation from the load, where the generating host facility does not need to have a relationship at all where with the load is. It can be a separate owner in and of itself. And these different flavors which have come up over the past years really have enabled developers like us and customers all over the country to get their hands on solar. As far as the size of the market, and Andrew alluded to this, recent forecasts for next year for the commercial space, utilizing kind of all these transaction mechanisms, we're looking about 1.7 gigawatts of solar projects in the U.S. for the commercial space. So a sizable market for us, which is excellent. So keeping all of those net metering transaction mechanisms in mind, let's go through some specific case studies. First one's pretty straightforward. It's your plain vanilla on-site net metering. This is Safeway. They are a national grocery chain all over the country. This is very typical of on-site solar DG. This is one of their stores in Hawaii, about 300 kilowatts. It's a rooftop. Of course, a lot of commercial customers have a lot of rooftops, so big market for us and other solar developers as well. We actually did a PPA, a power purchase agreement for Safeway, which, as Andrew mentioned, it provides instant savings for the off-taker, and is a great way to not only interact with decision makers on the financial side, but also on the operations side of the customer. Safeway also has a big strategic goal for sustainability and the environment. I think more and more we're seeing U.S. companies have sustainability goals of meeting certain carbon reduction, reducing their carbon footprint. And I always like to say the true green appeal of solar is the savings, it is the money. But more and more we're seeing commercial off-takers and industrial off-takers really have targets, hard targets they hold themselves to with respect to sustainability. These types of projects, rooftops, as you can imagine, takes a lot of work and a lot of good interaction with facilities managers to ensure that there's minimal storage disruptions during the construction. Obviously, you want the business to keep continuing going while you install these things. And also a lot of work and a lot of interaction to make sure that you don't do anything up on the roofs that will make the customers not happy. Obviously, there's HVAC systems typically up on rooftops. So we work a lot with the customer through the relationship to make sure that the design, the racking, and everything is up to snuff and make sure they're okay with it. So a very good example of on-site net metered rooftop. This next example, Hal's Warehouse in New Jersey, very similar to Rooftop. In this case, we actually designed multiple different products onto the rooftop. As a company, we're very agnostic to technology. We'll go out to the marketplace and find that technology, whether it's the panels, the racking, or anything else that'll make the best fit and save the most money for the customer. In this case, there were some concerns about roof penetration, so we were able to put some laminates up there. New Jersey was still is an interesting market if you're familiar with it. The SRECs, the New Jersey SRECs, can provide a significant revenue stream to the project. And if anybody remembers, back in 2009, those SRECs got very, very close to about $700. Very rich revenue stream. But by the time we hit 2012, they had literally collapsed to about $70. And now, nice to say, they're working their way back up to about $200. So as developers, as integrators that go out and reach out to customers and offer PPA, one of the big hurdles is to get comfortable with the SREC risk of the projects, because in effect, we're taking that revenue stream as developers and turning it around into savings for the customer. I'd say the initiative that PSE&G has put in place in New Jersey has certainly helped a lot, the solar loan program, to stabilize the price of the SRECs. So again, it really helps developers like us find those customers, acquire them, and close the deal with them. Next case study, Town of Wareham. So this other end of the spectrum of net metering, this is a perfect example of virtual net metering that Massachusetts allowed. I don't think anybody thought even a few years ago that a 6-megawatt ground mount would be considered a commercial project, but these days it is. Here you see a great picture of it. We were able to put a fixed tilt solution here and virtually net meter it. Because the area is off-site, it's really nowhere near the facilities, the actual facilities of the off-taker. There's minimal impact to their facilities. So we can go out, find some land, build a system, connect it to the grids, and basically have no impact to their facilities. And because we were able to do such a large ground mount, it actually benefits them because there's a lower PPA rate. It's more cost-effective to build a large ground mount than it would have been putting rooftop solar on their facilities. But doing this type of facility presents other challenges. As you can imagine, we've got to go out and find the land, either purchase the land or lease it from the owner. So there's lease agreements there that are to be put in place. There's a lot of permitting that needs to happen here. And in this particular case, we had to work with the Conservation Commission because there were some wetlands, and obviously we have to be very careful about that. And also because of the size of these virtual net metered projects, we have to work hand in hand with the utility with respect to interconnection. Impact studies have to be made, upgrades have to be done. In this case, we had to do upgrades to the interconnection. And of course, all the easements have to be put in place. So even though virtual net metering really expands the size of these projects, it provides other challenges for developers like us. Next one on Long Island, carports. You know, a lot of commercial off-takers, corporations, even public entities, have a heck of a lot of parking lots. And for us to go in and actually utilize those parking lots as assets and generating assets, a lot of people like to see that. This was 12 megawatts spread over about 7 sites. So each site was anywhere between 500 kilowatts to 800 kilowatts. Of course, the solution itself, depending on the off-taker, they might care about the design and the aesthetics, or they might just care about the lowest cost and the lowest PPA price. In this case, even though the off-taker was LIPA and it was a feed-in tariff, very, very similar to virtual net metering. where the generation of the kilowatt hours is somewhat completely different than what the actual off-taker is. In this case, we interacted with the County of Suffolk and building these carports on their parking lot, and we basically paid them lease payments. And as you can imagine, solar canopies, not only generate electricity, but they shield the cars underneath from the sun and the snow. One big challenge of parking lots, even though there's a lot of them, typically is the orientation of the parking spaces. A lot of times the parking spaces aren't most officially oriented to put the carports south or even southwest. So it's a discussion with the owner of the parking lot whether we're able to restripe them. A lot of times we're not. The heights of these are typically governed by fire codes for emergency purposes and emergency vehicles. And of course, lighting and safety. Most of the time, once we put these in, we go in and put underneath lighting and even cameras. And that's something that really gets the host on site for us to be able to put that on their system. Last but not least, case study. Any NASCAR fans out there? We put in a 3 megawatt ground mount at Pocono Raceway on Pennsylvania. This one is different than all the rest of them because instead of a PPA, the owner of the racetrack really wanted to own the system. They wanted to be the long-term owner of it. So we developed it, designed it, built it, commissioned it, and turned it over to them. They really wanted to have that cachet of owning the system. And because of who they are in NASCAR and the culture, they wanted all-American built solar panels. These days, not a lot of locally manufactured solar panels, but there are some out there. And in this case, and certainly in the case of the federal government and some public entities, that sometimes is a requirement to do American-made panels. So let's change the discussion a little bit into what happens after construction, after commissioning. Obviously, development costs and construction costs is a big part of being able to provide a value proposition to the customer. O&M and OPEX, operational expenses, is the next big part, especially when you have a large fleet of distributed assets. It's a very different proposition to have, say, one large 50 megawatt plant versus having 50 1 megawatt plants. So Jennifer mentioned that Andrew did too. Standardization is certainly the name of the game here. Standardize, standardize, standardize as much as you can to decrease OPEX costs, as well as the type of products you put on site. These days there's a lot of discussion on string inverters, module level inverters even, and central inverters. We see a fair mix now depending on what the requirement of the projects are. But in general, standardizing rooftops and the smaller projects on string inverters and the larger projects on central inverters, I think that you see that happening in the market. Met station is another big part of it. You can imagine for the large ground mount, the 6 megawatt ground mount, we put in a pretty robust Met station, whereas for distributed generation, let's say the Safeway 300 kilowatt rooftops and having 20 or 30 of those, it really becomes cost prohibitive to put a robust Met station on each and every single one of those rooftops. But at the same time, you do want to have data collection where you want to know if those assets are generating or not. But standardizing the Met station specs, whether they're robust ground mount Met stations or rooftop Met stations, Met station lights, really needs to be done. The other value of standardized products is minimizing the downtime of replacement. Imagine having 5 different inverter manufacturers across your asset fleet versus 2 or even 1. Being able to replace them quicker, working with one manufacturer to replace them quicker. So as much as you can standardize, tremendously lowers OPEX costs, But again, at the same time, site-specific conditions might not let you standardize everything. So that's a compromise you really have to look at when you're looking at your customer base. And then finally, SCADA, unified SCADA, which really refers to monitoring and control. Especially, again, with the large DG fleet, I don't think anybody can afford having disparate SCADA systems. Having one SCADA system really helps. And in fact, having that SCADA system be intelligent and alert-based. It's very time-consuming for asset managers to go in and monitor 100 sites, 100 DG sites. Whereas setting in thresholds and alert-based mechanisms to let the asset manager know that, hey, by the way, out of your 100 sites, these 4 are underperforming, and here's why they're underperforming. So very, very important as you're thinking of bringing on more and more sites to your asset base, you have to unify the SCADA system to be able to lower your operational cost. Very important. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about OEM versus third-party solutions. I'm actually going to hand it over to my colleague, Dalen Copeland, who's part of our EDF Renewable Services Group, our O&M team. So Dalen, over to you for this slide.
Thanks, Nader. Hi, everybody. My name is Dalen Copeland. I'm the Director of Business Development for EDF Renewable Services. We are a renewable energy service provider. We operate 8.6 gigawatts of renewable energy projects in the U.S. So we have, I hope, a pretty keen understanding of what the difference between sort of going with an OEM versus an ISP, which is an independent service provider like ourselves, and some of the pros and cons and what you sort of need to be looking for when you're talking about hiring an O&M provider. So when you're thinking about installing a solar project, there are a lot of benefits in going with the OEM or with your sort of installer, right? And that is that in some states, like California, you're required to sort of wrap a guarantee on the project, and that provides a lot of comfort to both owners and potential financing parties if you're financing your project. The other things are if you're going with an OEM, you've got presumably, again, pretty good and solid warranty coverage from an OEM. You've got their alignment with their own design group and their access to their supply chain for any sort of parts replacement in the course of providing services. And you sometimes sort of get, I've put it here in the slides as a warm fuzzy, right? Some people really like to go with the people who designed the project. It makes you just feel like they know what's going on with the equipment. And that can be incredibly helpful when you're working through financing a project, or if you're looking at, bringing on equity investors of some sort, or partners. Some of the cons of working with an OEM is, that's not their core business. First of all, servicing the projects, that's not usually where they make the majority of their money. So their focus tends to be on, design and sale of the product, and not ongoing operation and maintenance of the products once they're installed at an owner's site. The other thing can be price, depending on who you're talking to and how interested they are in doing that business for a long time. They may not be very price competitive, and may not be inspired to be price competitive. And they can sometimes really lack transparency to an owner. So, that's their equipment, and if it's malfunctioning and it's covered by warranty, they may not be terribly interested in sharing with you exactly what's going on with the equipment. And all of those things are sort of in contrast to working with an independent service provider who is generally more technology agnostic. So, didn't build anything that's installed at your sites, was perfectly happy to tell you exactly what's going on there, has a different sort of approach to the business. It is generally their core business, so it's something that they do day in and day out, and they're interested in remaining both knowledgeable and price competitive so that they can stay active in the market. And some of the things that you should sort of look for with respect to an ISP and things to make sure that you're getting and you understand how the ISP is going to fulfill your needs as an owner or the project's needs as an operating power plant are, making sure that they have an approach and a sense of responsiveness to the owner that you are comfortable with. It should really sort of be a partnership with respect, these assets have a long operating life, and so everybody should be working to get as much production out of them for as long as possible with the lowest operating costs. Make sure that they are willing to be transparent with you. Talk to them about what the reporting looks like, how often they're going to, communicate with respect to the performance of the project. They should be financially stable. So one of the sort of interesting things about the solar market right now is that installers, service providers, OEMs, all of those parts of the market are incredibly fragmented, right? So there's not a huge number of players who have a very large market share. You've got a ton of people who have very small slices of market share. And so, the question there is not if some of those folks will go away, but when some of those folks will go away. So you want to make sure that diligence is done on your service provider, that they're financially stable, and you can see them being around in a few years, particularly if you sign up for any sort of long-term service agreement with them. And then you also want to make sure that they have the right back office support functions. So in order to sort of effectively compete with an OEM, they need to have a really healthy supply chain and procurement department. Obviously, quality, health, safety, and environment is incredibly important in all power plants, solar or otherwise, because you're working, with high voltage equipment. You need to make sure they have a really robust health, safety, and environment program and quality control. And other things like, do they have engineering support? Do they have remote monitoring? Nader mentioned making sure that you had SCADA that was alert-based and integrated, and you could view all of your sites if you've got more than one site installed, or if you have multiple projects, all of your projects in a way that allows quick assimilation of information. Is there anyone there that's going to monitor that all the time for you, depending on what, your interconnect or any of your sort of offtake agreements are? Do you have any requirements to be able to remotely control the projects in a way, make sure that your ISP helps you handle that if that's the case? And so it's really just careful to make sure you know who you're doing business with and that they're going to be able to meet your long-term needs, and consider carefully the pros and cons of whoever you choose to do your service business. With that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Nader.
Great, thank you, Dalen. So we'll wrap up. A couple quick words on EDF. A large global company based in Europe. We do it all: development, construction, O&M. Based in San Diego, but offices are across the country. And like Dalen said, about 8.6 gigawatts under O&M, about 5.6 gigawatts developed. And again, this is for all renewables, solar, wind, etc. So that's it for our site. Hope that was helpful. Back to you, Jennifer.
All right. Thanks, Nader. So I did want to mention that Pocono project was our Project of the Year in 2011 in the Reader's Choice category. It was a very popular project. So thanks for telling us a little more about it. So we have some good questions here, and why don't we just get right to them. Some specifics. We do have a question: how much land was used for that 6 megawatt install? Do you want to address that?
Yeah, give me maybe 30 seconds to look up
Okay,
that figure. So go to the next question and come back.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, another question is asking for, is there a sweet spot for ROI? I mean, both of you may have different answers on this. I mean, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Andrew, are you hearing your customers are wanting, some specific number?
Sure. I mean, they always want a better number. That's for sure. But I think then if you're in the 6, 7, 8, even 9-year range, I think that you're in the sweet spot, and it will certainly depend on the tax situation for a customer. But tax equity investors are looking for return rates in the 10, 11, 12%. And I think when you look for a specific off-taker investor, they're comfortable with something a little bit less because they have something that's a little less valuable of a commodity in the industry. So, the tax equity investors in our industry right now can demand a higher rate of return. When you're looking at off-taking customers, I think that if you're in the 7, 8-year range, you're in a pretty good spot.
Good. Nader, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, on our side, the majority of our customers really love PPAs. So for us, it's not as much of years of payback. It's as, hey, can you beat my grid pricing currently, and can you continue to keep it low? So it's instant savings for them up front that they're looking for. Some people say, you know what, I want 10% right up front. Some people where sustainability really drives their decision, they say, you know what, get me a sustainable project. If you can at least meet what I do currently, we'll do it.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I would just add that to what Nader's point was, is we find the same thing, that commercial customers really do favor the PPA, and as we both talked about, solar has a high learning curve. There's a high capital cost. These folks aren't, whether they be the municipality or the business, aren't in that business, and so they much rather have other folks take the risk and also receive that benefit, but receive something that's stable, predictable, and provides some utility bill savings or even equal to what they're paying currently.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, so let's jump to some other ones. Okay, let's talk about what are the key differences between developing a project for an industrial client versus a traditional utility off-taker. I mean, obviously those are very different types of projects.
Let me chime in. Man, big differences. One thing Andrew kind of alluded to, I mean, the sales cycle is entirely different. With a non-utility customer, a Fortune 500 or anybody like that, you're talking to COOs, to CFOs, to sustainability officers, and just the value proposition and the way you pitch it is entirely different. Most of the time, some of the time, you can get into bilateral discussions where you can do a lot of relationship building with the commercial customer. Typically can't do that with the utility off-taker. They have a very standardized, very thorough RFP process that they go through. Also with utility customers, you typically don't do any on-site development. A lot of our projects, we develop off-site and we just kind of bid into their RFPs close to their interconnection points. And certainly for utility off-takers, the interconnection process is a lot more thorough, a lot more robust. As a developer, we have a lot of challenges and curtailment and discussions around curtailment where you really don't see that with the commercial customer base. So quite different.
Yeah, sure. Andrew, did you want to add to that, or should I
sure. Just a quick note on that. I think Nader put it well, and I think that a big difference between a utility PPA is the utility PPAs, they're really looking at price and a little bit on sort of time of delivery, right? If you're talking about the production curve, is it a tracking project, or when is it going to be delivering the power that they need? And price really drives their decision. I think when you're looking at the small-scale commercial and mid-scale commercial, you're usually not going to be in a price category that the utility wants. It's just not going to be low enough. And so when you're thinking about small and mid-sized commercial, you're really selling the other benefits of solar, whether it be where it's located, whether it's American-made product, the environmental attributes of the installation. So you're selling sort of the softer side of solar in addition to the financial. And with the utility, I think the softer side really just doesn't drive the decision making.
Sure. Well, that makes a lot of sense. All right, well, let's jump to the smaller projects. So you talked about some of the unique challenges in the smaller commercial space. Are you seeing more investors willing to buy smaller projects in the under 500 kW range? What do you guys think?
I'm happy to jump in on that one initially, but I think what we're finding is that they are, if they can be guaranteed or they have the prospect for a pipeline. I think you're seeing most tax equity investors okay with 500 kilowatt projects and maybe a little bit smaller if they know that the due diligence and the legal costs and all that brain drain that goes on with closing a project can be repeatable. I would say it's much more common in the below 500 kilowatt range to find one-off investors. You might find, a family office. You might find a business with a high amount of tax appetite that's willing to jump in, and they recognize the value and the investment benefits of solar, but it's less repeatable, and you just don't find the bigger players in that space as much.
Yeah, and I can add to that, and I think to the degree it can be standardized as big, and putting them in the portfolio. So one-off is challenging, but imagine putting 10 or 20 of those projects with all very similar PPA agreements, if not the same PPA agreement, very similar lease agreement, similar credit profiles. I know some investors, focus geographically. Some of them focus by type of off-taker. So yes, I think the market is there as long as, again, you can kind of aggregate them, bundle them, have similar transaction documents like PPAs and leases and credit profiles. It's doable.
Okay, great. Okay, we have a question for both of you guys on weather data. What weather data are you using when you're sizing your systems and structuring deals such as PPAs? And then they go on, are financiers universally comfortable with this data, or are you finding that they're requiring varying levels of certainty?
Nader, you want to go first there?
Yeah, it does depend. We've got a pretty good resource assessment group that uses various tools. Obviously things like PVSys, a lot of satellite data out there. A lot of data that's free, but eventually we end up paying for kind of more robust information. Another thing we do, if there's a market that we know we're going to go into, we're going to set up our own met stations ahead of time. So like Massachusetts is a market we kind of entered a couple of years ago, and right away we put down some met stations there that we own and control. So having that kind of on-site history of our own data that we vet very thoroughly certainly helps. So we try to have as much robust data as possible, because the resource is really a big part of the financial model. If you get the resource right and the revenue stream, it makes a big deal.
Absolutely. Andrew, you want to add anything?
No, I think Nader covered it well. I mean, we don't do, in the smaller scale commercial market, you don't generally see a lot of, of that type of data collected. We do wind measurement as a dual axis tracking company. We do have anemometers on every single tracker, so they automatically can stow flat if the wind picks up, and we have temperature data, but and we do use PVSys as well. So, but in the smaller scale sector, you generally aren't going to see that type of data collected for the most part.
Okay. Okay, great. So we have a specific question on please explain met station setup. Someone needs a little clarity on that.
Sure. So meteorological station. So that fast 20 times.
Yeah, right.
You want to gather the right data points. Obviously, irradiance, wind speed are two big ones. On a lot of projects, we'll put reference cells to be part of that met station. So it really depends how you spec it out. Again, on the larger projects, you can spend a good amount of money on these met stations and even have redundancy. But on the small rooftops, where we've got a large portfolio of those rooftops, it becomes really cost prohibitive. So what we've looked at is maybe using the inverters that have I/O ports to kind of plug in little reference cells and things like that. So, I guess the spec of the met station really depends on the type and size of the project.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that answer. So we have a question about 2015, and I always love those. What is the expected picture for 2015 on so-called grid parity in various market segments, such as CCI, MUSH that you talked about, utility and retail grid parity, commercial grid parity, utility, wholesale grid parity? How close are we getting to, how low are our prices getting?
Sure, I'll chime in. It really depends how you define grid parity too, like you said, Jennifer. Some markets already have it. If you look at Hawaii, with those really high electricity prices, already at grid parity. If you look at California, the CSI, the solar rebate, is pretty much done. It's gone. There is no more state rebate.
Great.
And the ITC is going to ramp down as well. But again, given the electricity prices along the coast, kind of East Coast, West Coast, there already are some markets that are there or very close to it. And I think you just kind of focus on the coast for now.
And I would just add,
answer?
Yeah, pretty similar. And I would just add that, again, and not to belabor the point, I think as installers or prospective developers are looking at the mid-scale or small-scale commercial development market, I don't think that market is there yet. You just don't see a lot of folks going after the grid parity and sort of the must-take price. You're really still looking at folks lining up a customer and actually getting what would otherwise be a better rate than that going rate. But I think you are starting to see, at least in some of the New England markets as well, you're seeing PPA rates for like RFPs for feed-in tariffs, for example, in the 10, 11 cent range for a 2-megawatt project, which has come down significantly over the last couple of years. So you certainly are seeing a cost competitiveness that is starting to get there.
And Jennifer, if I could add something to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
We really can't rest on our laurels as integrators and developers. Over the past few years, the majority of the reduction in cost has been from the panel side. A lot of panel manufacturers, a lot of bleeding there. And I think some people have gotten complacent, frankly. We really now, as developers, have to look at eking out construction costs, OPEX, O&M costs, balance of systems costs, financing costs, standardizing documents. So it's an ever-evolving market, and we really can't be complacent. We got to keep digging in, figuring out where to save those costs and keep lowering those PPA prices. And that will certainly help get us to grid parity quicker in some markets.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think one of the things that has helped significantly is the virtual or remote net metering policies that we both referenced. I mean, that is a policy development that the industry has in particular seized upon, that has helped us lower our costs, in that you can find better sites, more cost-effective sites, deliver a better rate to customers. And it's those types of policy developments. And I know, for example, the state of New York, an emerging solar market, they're looking at virtual net metering policies. A number of other states that don't have them are, and that's the type of stuff that the industry, again, can't be complacent on and needs to keep advancing the policy paradigm on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, policy is so important in also driving all this. So we have just 1 minute left, and I have one more question here. There are lots of other questions that we're probably not going to get to, but I want to let everybody listening know that we have your questions and we have your email, and you may receive an email answer to your questions, so don't despair if we don't answer it right now. Okay, so the last question I was going to ask is back to the customer acquisition. So someone wants to know, what is the most effective way that you've been able to acquire clients? I mean, what would you say is your number one most effective?
Relationships is what I would say, where if you are in business in a region and can develop or have relationships with customers, and you can go to them with a pitch of essentially replacing their electric bills with solar, I think you're going to be quite successful. And if you have that relationship, you ought to use it.
Totally agree. And I'd add, the relationship is good, and do your homework. Really understand your customer, understand their facilities, even before those first few meetings, and just be respectful to them. right? Walk into that meeting with an idea of how you'd like to help them.
Nice. All right. Well, great. Well, we're all hoping to see lots more solar continue to be developed, and I want to thank you both so much, and thank our audience for coming and taking some time out to listen to this excellent presentation, I thought. And so on behalf of Renewable Energy World and Penwell, I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank Andrew, Chief Strategy Officer with All Earth Renewables, and Nader Jandagi, who's Director of CNI Solar at EDF Renewable Energy, and our sponsors, EDF Renewable Service and All Earth Renewables, for today's presentation. Thanks for talking about commercial solar project development from customer acquisition to operations and maintenance. And as a reminder to everybody, this presentation will be archived within 24 hours and will be accessible from the homepage or from renewableenergyworld.com. We do have a webcast tab you can click on and find it there. And a reminder email will be sent to everybody who registered, complete with a direct link to the archive. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on future webcasts.
Happy holidays.